Hello to the wonderful world of the internet. We are the Cinema Joes back again. I am Justin. I'm here with Casey as always, and I'm also here with a special guest, Alex, who will be joining us for the second part of our Gone Girl discussion, film from David Fincher, highly anticipated film. Last time we talked about the allegations against the film in terms of whether it's feminist, anti-feminist, misogynist, misandrist, that sort of thing. This time, I think we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction. So I'll turn it over to Alex. And before I do, I just want to say, like our last video, we are going to have to throw up a giant spoiler alert here. This film is almost impossible to talk about in any kind of intellectual capacity without giving away major plot twists. So I will turn it over to Alex.
Okay, well, hi guys. Thanks for letting me be on the show. It's very exciting. Love listening to you guys talk. And I'm glad that I get to do it on a movie like Gone Girl, which is definitely a movie that a lot of people like to talk about. I really, overall, I'd start off by saying that I enjoyed the movie quite a bit. I thought that it wasn't quite as good as it could have been, though, given the fact that it is a David Fincher movie. And and some of his films are of my favorite films of all time, The Social Network in particular. So I had high hopes going in. I feel like it was very entertaining, but it ultimately didn't have as much resonance as I was hoping it would. One of the reasons why I think that could be is something that I think a lot of people aren't talking about right now, and that's the role that Ben Affleck plays in the film and how he executes it. And I guess before I start, I'd like to hear a little bit about what you guys thought about Ben Affleck in the role of Nick.
It's funny because I had very low expectations for Affleck in this movie, and I was looking forward to this film, but I wasn't sure if Affleck was going to be the thing I really liked about it, mostly because I've never really been that impressed with Affleck as an actor. I feel like he has two modes, one where he's a frat boy, and then he has the other one where he's just kind of flat and emotionless. Because the first time I saw this, I said, well, he seems to be more of the flat, emotionless thing. He does have some moments where he's shows a little bit of humor, but it seems to really work for the film overall, because you really can't, I really felt like I couldn't get a gauge on this guy pretty early on. And even later on, his marriage has resumed in some form. Even then, I had a hard time really getting engaged in what he was feeling and what he was thinking. And I thought that Fincher really used him very well for that purpose. Seeing it a second time, I feel like I appreciate his performance even more. He has like these little moments that are really good. I think of the scene, the gummy bear scene with Tyler Perry, just how he reacts to every one of those and how he keeps coming back with trying something new. I think he does a really good job there. And then the end of that scene when he catches the gummy bear in his mouth and he gives this little smile. It's this really nice moment. I think he works really well for this movie.
Yeah, we've talked before about, I don't know if they've ever made it into our videos, but we've talked before about how Ben Affleck doesn't ever seem to stand out as an actor. He just does, he just kind of phones it in well, but never really is a standout. Like in Argo, we talked about how he's just there as a presence. And I have only seen it once so far, so maybe he's much better on the second viewing, but that was definitely the impression I had with him. And yeah, he does come across much more sympathetic than maybe the writer wanted him to be. But does it take away from the movie? I don't know if it detracts from the movie. I think it just gives it a slightly different light. I still think the ending was it was so hard to digest that even with him in a sympathetic light, actually, it might even be harder to digest because you kind of like this guy. You wanted him to get away from Amy, but because you like him, you want him to get away from Amy. Whereas if you didn't really sympathize with him, you would just see these two asshole people living together, and that's less hard to digest, in my opinion.
Well, and I think you kind of got a little ahead of me because I hadn't on the podcast. I haven't actually said what I think, which is just that I think that Affleck he does a great job in the film doing what his job is, which, like, as an actor, obviously I'm not an actor, but I've listened to enough actors talk, and I feel like I have a good sense of what an actor needs to do in a role. It's not look at their character as a good guy or a bad guy, but really try to understand where they're coming from and make it feel real to them and make their actions feel justifiable to them. And so, in that sense, I think that Affleck does a very strong job making the character feel justified in what he does, making him feel like a fully fleshed out person who can live with himself at the end of the day, even if he made some poor decisions along the way.
Yeah.
But I think that that's actually to the detriment of the film, or at least to the story that the film is trying to convey. Because I haven't read the book, but I've listened to a lot of reviews from the people who did read the book. And the thing that they take away all the time is that this book and this film is supposed to be a very condemning message about marriage. And that never really came across to me, because what the takeaway for me was it was a kind of bonkers, edge-of-your-seat thriller that also served as a very nice media satire, and also said some interesting things about class, but never really dealt with marriage in an interesting way, because these people, Nick and Amy, like Nick felt like a realistic portrayal of a husband who maybe like became disenchanted in his relationship and made some mistakes, and Amy seemed like a psycho, crazy, like comic book character who just went well above and beyond anything that was relatably human. And even if she started out in a human place at some point in that relationship, by the time that we meet Amy and understand who she is in the present tense of the narrative, she is just totally far afield from what an actual relatable human being could be. And I feel like that dynamic doesn't serve to hold any kind of interesting commentary on what marriage is, because how can you possibly relate to this situation when Nick is clearly not really the best guy in the world, but he's married to a psychopath. So there's no way that you could walk away saying, oh, Nick and Amy, they deserve each other, they're horrible, and maybe this makes me think about what marriage does to a person and what the ideas behind the institution of marriage really are about. Which in the case of this movie, I think from Amy's perspective was, marriage was another identity, another mask that she could put on for the outside world, and it seemed like she had thought that she had entered into a relationship with Nick, who was very willing to play a part the same way that she was playing a part, when in fact at some point along the line he started to become more of himself and was less interested in the facade. And that's where that kind of interesting take on marriage is supposed to come in. And that did come across in the book for a lot of people, but I don't think it's really there on the screen because of the fact that it seems like Nick in the movie is just this kind of a doofus kind of guy. He's like an everyman schmo who like meets a pretty girl and woos her, and then like gets older and complacent and kind of falls out of love with her, and then cheats on her with like a dumb younger girl. And like that's pretty much where his arc is. He never really does anything that's horrendously awful, like murdering multiple people. Like Amy at the end of this movie kills Neil Patrick Harris's character in a totally absurdly like emotionless way, which is, I don't know, it's hard to watch that and see it as gruesome as you do, and also think about the fact that she framed her husband for her own murder and was totally willing to watch him get executed for it. These are things that are not on par with.
Do you think Amy should have been toned down, or do you think Nick should have been portrayed as more of a jerk? I mean, there's definitely a dichotomy, like you're saying, but I'm not sure if it would have worked either if they both were up on Amy's level.
Well, it seems that in the book, the way that the Nick character is portrayed, and it's told from his perspective, so you first get more insight into what's going on internally, and I think this is where it doesn't match up with what's going on in the film because of what Affleck portrays externally in the role. But it seems like he is not the nicest guy in his internal monologue in terms of critiquing people and things like that. And it also seems like he, in the book, was a very superficial person who was also a tortured writer and was very self-indulgent, and there was a lot of aspects to his character that just it really doesn't seem like he was basically a small-time like New York socialite almost, not socialite, but like intelligentsia, hung out on Upper West Side cocktail parties and things like that. And you really don't get that sense of him at all. You see him in his element at home, and that seems like who he always was. And all you get is that one flashback scene when they first meet. And I guess if you have read the book, it seems that you get the sense that this is who that character was pretending to be always. But I think that because of how Affleck portrays it, and that you really only get that one sense of who he is, that it really just seems like that's him just trying to impress a girl. And that's not the same thing as openly entering into a relationship that is set on false pretenses where superficiality is what is important. Like, that doesn't really come across to me. And I think it's because Affleck is just so likable and so relatable in the role.
I'm still not convinced it's detrimental to the film for him to be likable. It's definitely, as a direct adaptation of the book, it's certainly detrimental. If you're coming into the movie trying to do movie versus book, then there's definitely the conclusions you're going to reach. But if you're just looking at the movie as an independent piece of work, I think it's very successful.
Well, I think that the way that it falls flat as a film is that in the final moments of the movie, he decides to, and we're obviously in spoiler territory, but he decides to stay with her for no reason that is understandable at all. Like,
because there's a kid involved now. That's the reason.
Yeah, but that's a very weak argument. And honestly, if he was invested in his kid's life, he would not want him or her to be raised by this psychopath who is a crazy, manipulative, awful human being for the next, 18 years. And obviously, he wouldn't be able to influence that kid all that much because he'd be terrified that she was going to murder him at some point. So he couldn't step out against her and what he was what she was telling the kid to do or what she was making the kid feel. The last person in the world that I would want my child to be raised by is Amy. So that feels like a rushed over point of rationalization in the movie. And it makes the ending feel kind of flat to me because it's like, okay, they decide to be in this relationship now. And I have no sense of how that's going to work because all we've seen previous, since she's been back, is just some really expertly crafted horror scenes, basically, of her in the kitchen looking, perfectly manicured and him looking at her like a zombie. So, you don't really get a sense of what the last few weeks of their relationship have been like at all, in the everyday sense.
Justin, did you want to say something about the kid?
What you were saying about sort of those last couple of scenes with them back together again.
Yes.
At least, for all appearances, reconciled. It's not so much that they're made for each other, it's more that it's certainly something he wrestles with. And I think the film does take a while to really show his internal conflict once she comes back. I think of that one scene where he's in the bedroom with her and she says, "Was there a baby?" And she says, "There can be," and then he leaves because he's obviously not comfortable. But then Fincher shows him in this other room, in a dark room, stroking a cat, and we don't really know what he's thinking about. But it's just interesting that Fincher shows us that, because if this really was someone that we're supposed to sympathize with, I feel like they wouldn't have taken the time to show us that scene.
So you took that scene as him kind of contemplating something evilly?
That's
not
for me.
Evil necessarily, but it's murky. There's
murky
something
is a
going
good word for it. Yeah, you can definitely see there's something lurking beneath the surface, and you can almost maybe think.
I think the film does make that clear.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I read that scene very differently.
How'd you read it?
I read that scene as he was retreating into the only corner of the house that he felt safe in, and he was holding the only form of intimacy that he had left, which was this cat. And
that's how it starts off,
because he felt so alienated in the moment.
It definitely started off that way, but then I think
in that scene that I think is, and the way that his face is covered in shadow, that I think is a little more unknowable, I guess.
I think you guys are both right. I think you guys both nailed it. He gets there because he's scared and he has to retreat. But then because he's retreating and cornered, there might be some dark thoughts that he's trying to work through.
He doesn't. It's because there's not a sense I got of him outright rejecting her, at least not with the exception of maybe that one moment when she tells him that she's pregnant. For reals.
I don't know. I feel like at the end of the movie, they wanted us to feel like he wanted to be there, that he got some sick pleasure out of being a part of that relationship. And I don't think that that's earned in the movie at all, because you spend over 2 hours with him basically either feeling very indifferent about the fact that his wife is missing and could be dead, and then on like this revenge bent on trying to manipulate her and take her down to clear his name. And then how does all of that add up to, I actually secretly enjoy being with this crazy woman and I'm going to commit myself to her?
I don't know if he enjoys being with her.
But I think that's the only implication that, like, that it really seems like the film is trying to get us to that place. And I know that that's where the novel gets to as well. They like get this sick pleasure out of it because of what she says in the movie. She says it explicitly. She says that I make you want to be better, and so therefore you enjoy being with me because I make you want to be a better person.
I think these are complex characters who's very hard to figure out just by watching their actions on screen. That's really what it comes down to. I don't think he's just doing it because he wants to be with her, because he gets pleasure from being with her. I think that might be a part of it, but he's also terrified of her. So I know we were talking about the kid before, and we don't think the kid is a good enough reason. And you're absolutely right that if I were dating Amy and she were pregnant, I would somehow try to get custody of that kid. But he's backed into a corner. There's almost nothing he can do. Certainly nothing he can see. Every authority he's had on the topic, the lawyer, the detective, his sister's trying to help him, but so far they haven't been able to come up with any solutions. So what can they do?
Yeah, but I mean, that detective like poked 12 holes in her story in just the exit interview that she had at the hospital. Like, he could have easily done like some type of an investigation on her if he was trying to sue for the rights to the kid. At the very least, she's unstable, and I don't see how she would be able to reasonably pass through a court of law as a qualified mother if he was suing her for custody. Like, I just don't see how. Like, the only reason why she gets away with everything that she gets away with is because she's created this cult of personality around herself, and everybody is just so shocked and amazed that she's been able to escape that nobody wants to think anything badly of her. They've been spending the last how many months thinking of her as this innocent victim, and now she's come back from the dead and has to kill somebody in order to get away from them. And it's like this great story. Nobody wants to ruin it by being like, oh no, she's actually a crazy person. But if he actually was in a courtroom and he hired an investigative journalist, like an investigator of some sort, to poke holes in the story, it would be very easy to do so. And they if you had time on your side, like if it wasn't such an immediate thing, like if you had 6 months or a year after all of this had happened for the emotions to die down, I think that he would be able to very easily make a case that she's a dangerous person who, if she shouldn't be in jail, she should definitely not be raising her child.
I don't know. There's a lot of what ifs. I'd have to watch the movie again very closely to try to find whether or not the holes would be easily findable again, and if they are they incriminating, or are they just holes?
Because the other thing that's attractive, I think, maybe not love in the conventional sense, but it's the comfort of playing a role and knowing what that's going to give you, as opposed to flying blind, which is what he would be about. I guess I see it more as that. I see it more as him deciding, I don't know if I can handle a life that's not based on playing this role.
So go with the devil you know, in other words.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and I guess that's what the interest thematically is regarding marriage, is that it's the idea of, like, you know this person inside and out, they know you inside and out, so you're willing to play the role as a happily married couple on the outside because it's better than the alternative of the unknown. And I think that that's where it's like, oh, this scathing indictment of marriage. But I don't know, did that resonate with you guys?
Yeah, I think the fact that they bring a child into it is actually worked for me, because people will stay together for that exact reason. People will stay together to raise a child, even if they're not the most stable of individuals. Hopefully not as unstable as the Amy character. The film plays so much with appearances and perception that I find it interesting listening to a lot of different takes on it, because I know that some reviewers will take some information as real, and other reviewers just assume that it's fake because Amy told us about it, or...
Right, yeah, I wanted to ask you guys about what your takes on those flashbacks were, because I find it really... Because she says two things that are conflicting in her explanation of what she's done, like with the diary. When you get to the point where she's explaining her master plan, dogging. She says, one, you have to start off the diary by writing like your romance, and you have to make it real. Like, being real there is essential. but she also says that it's like the whole point of this diary is to make America fall in love with the couple and then realize that Nick is a monster who's going to kill her. And if the intention is to make America fall in love with you, well then, are you really being super accurate in telling your love story?
No.
Like, so was that actually real? Like, were the events partially real? Were they based in reality? But like,
well, you know, that raises a great philosophical question. How much of what you remember is actually, or how much of it is tainted by your own, you know, internal thoughts and feelings, and how much of that do you project on the outside world? So she might remember those first couple days the way she wrote down, but whether or not they ever happened slightly differently, I bet you, because I know this is true for me, when you think of some major moment in the past, you're going to remember it, and it's going to be hard to prove this, because how can you prove something from the past unless you have video evidence of it? You'll remember it differently than it actually happened. So that might be the case in this case.
And actually, this is a little tangential, but I don't know, have you guys seen any of the new Showtime original series, The Affair?
No.
It premiered about, like, its whole central premise is that it's an hour-long program that's divided up into a half. Like, one half of it is from the male protagonist's perspective, the other half of it is from the female protagonist's perspective of the same event. And you watch it, and you see how drastically different their understandings of what has gone on, and the conceit is that they're being interviewed by someone independently of each other, and they're recalling what the events were that happened several years earlier. So in the first part of it, like at least in the pilot episode, which I've seen, you have the lead character basically as the hero of his family, and like this like great, awesome dad, and this like super great lover to his wife, and all these girls like hit on him all the time, and he just can't stop. And he like meets this waitress, and she's just hitting on him so much, and he can't get away from her, and eventually like a spark flies. And then you see from the waitress's perspective what her whole day has been like, and she's like this tortured heroine who has gone through like this really serious emotional problem where she had lost a child a year ago, and so she's disconnected from her husband, and she's just in like a very depressed state, and it almost seems as though that he is pursuing her, and she's almost being taken advantage of because she's so vulnerable, and she seems very hesitant the whole time. And it's very interesting because you could totally see how both of those characters would see something very differently, even though the basic events are all the same. And I think that that's something that maybe this movie wants to play with a little bit, and I don't think that they really nail it that well. And obviously, it's only a component of this movie, whereas that seems like a major part of that show, and also it's a television show, so they have a lot more room to play with those ideas than a movie does. But I think that in that way, it kind of seems like they're just playing fast and loose with memory, in an intelligent way that kind of allows them to let the audience fill in the blanks instead of actually having to answer the questions themselves of motivation and of where these people actually ended up. And I enjoy that ambiguity a bit because, you know, I like to be an active viewer and be engaged, and I like when viewer engagement is rewarded by the narrative. But I think you also have to ask at a certain point, are they eliding it for a real purpose, or are they eliding it because they really can't tell the story any other way, and they're just banking on the intellectual pedigree of the people behind the film to kind of fluff it out by reputation? So whereas if it wasn't directed by David Fincher, we maybe wouldn't be thinking, oh, well, he's clearly doing this because he has an idea about this thing, and that's why. We would just be saying, oh, this dialogue is horrendous. Why is it, why are they talking like this? No one talks like this. This is so wooden, and it's impossible for me to be engaged with it. But it's like, oh, well, David Fincher was the one who's behind it, so obviously he wouldn't have let it into the movie if he
I very rarely view movies with names, like knowing the names going in. I mean, maybe the actors, but very rarely do I know a director or what his reputation is like. I never for a moment felt disengaged from the movie. I was always very invested. I was invested in Nick a lot, and I know that's what we started out talking about, is Nick's investiture, you know, is your investment in Nick wrong? And that's definitely a good question. Unfortunately, I don't think we've reached a conclusion, and I don't think we will within the time that we have left. So if any of our viewers, let us know what you think on the topic. But I was always I don't think the dialogue was too wooden. I thought Ben's wooden performance actually worked for the character because he tends to internalize a lot of his feelings, and it worked well in the context of this film. And as far as, you know, Amy's psychopathy, if that's how you pronounce it, it was definitely sort of hard to believe, but also not so far-fetched that it really took me out. But these are just my opinions.
You were still kind of wrestling with the writing style, because it really is, you're right, there's definitely an artifice to it, but I think it really works for these characters, because this is a whole lot of unreliable narrators. And
very true.
They're not just going to tell you a story, they're going to tell you what they think and what they believe. And I think the film challenges them at every turn. I think while the writing itself on paper is really kind of weird and you know, like feels artificial, what's underneath that is the film actually challenging what these people are saying and what they believe.
That might be one of the reasons I really like the detective in this film.
I hope that is the case, but right, yeah, the detective in the film I like a lot.
Yeah, because
like,
she's kind of like trying to sift through all of their bullshit, and she's like, what are these guys talking about? What's the real truth down here?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Alex, you were saying.
Yeah, no, I was saying, I hope that there is underlying, like, layer to the film, because it makes it more enjoyable, and there's definitely a lot of intelligent people talking about the film and giving more context to things and making me question some of the things that I thought going in, like, immediately after watching the movie. But I still have to wonder, maybe we're projecting a lot of that onto the movie because you were hoping for it to be an point of conversation about intellectual ideas that aren't really on the screen as well as they could be, at least. The dialogue honestly really did take me out of it a lot. I think that's it. I'm someone who dialogue and writing is central to the film experience. Huge fan of Aaron Sorkin, for instance. Even though his dialogue isn't realistic, it's very hard to not enjoy. There was just some lines in this movie that just, you know, obviously the whole, like, when they meet and everything like that was just very kind of over the top.
It was definitely, you could tell it was scripted. That wouldn't happen in real life.
Yeah, but then there's also other things, like in the present context of the movie, like when his sister, like, gets into an argument with him at one point, and he's like, "Are you even with me?" And she's like, "Nick, how could you ask me that? Of course I'm with you. I've been with you since before we were born."
No, you're right.
Oh my God,
in that sense, they are. Some of the lines really were weird, but I thought they were few and far between. That's one. Another one was when Amy she just says to Nick, like, dead face, "That's what marriage is." What? There's like, what?
Marriage. Yeah,
that's marriage. Yeah, that was another line. I was like, that's a weird thing to say, I guess.
Like, you might as well just put 6 underlines underneath it, like, highlighted it. Just like, this is the theme of our movie. Like,
I thought they were.
It's like how in action movies when they just say the title for no reason.
Yeah.
It's like, I am an honorable citizen. It's like, oh, that's the name of the movie. Like, you know, it's like.
All right, so let's wrap it up. We're running out of time. I just want to get everyone's, you know, final thoughts on the issue. I thought the movie was good. I haven't read the book. I think the book definitely delves into a lot of the issues much deeper and much more effectively, and I would love to take a look at it. But as a standalone film, I think the movie works pretty well. Could it have been improved upon? Sure, but really, let's be honest, what can't have improvements?
Justin, what do you think?
Oh, well, I talked about this a little bit in our last video, so I'll be brief, but this is probably one of my favorite films of the year so far, honestly. I think what I've been fascinated by is just the multitude of different replies to this film based on whether people think that it's attacking one thing. I've seen things saying that it's not feminist at all, that it hates women. I've seen other things that say it really hates the guys and that it's a great feminist piece. I just find, like, the discussion really interesting. And I guess, you know, I haven't read the book. I can't say anything about the book. I can just go on what I saw. And what I saw, I think, was murky enough and showed enough ambiguity that I think there's multiple ways to read this film. And I think it's a film that's worth revisiting, even if you think you know exactly what's going on and who's to blame and all that. Because I think the film will really challenge you if you go back and look at it again.
Yeah, and I think ultimately I find this to be basically like a B-plus movie. You know, it's a great thrill ride. I was engaged in it from the start to the end, minus a few clunky pieces of dialogue that I had to laugh at. But I felt like I was really with the movie for the most part while I was watching it. And I also, I have to say, I don't know if you guys talked about this at all earlier, but I think the media satire in the film is fantastic.
Yes,
I think
that's a great thing we didn't
by,
talk about.
By showing what that kind of like huge tea kettle of a, like, I don't know the best way to say it,
well,
but to show like what that kind of media circus is like from the inside, and just doing it like without exaggerating it at all. You know, it really seemed like they took it to a point to make sure that, like, you know, the Nancy Grace character wasn't super over the top, and that like there weren't crazy people running around. It really felt like exactly what would have happened, and seeing it from the inside really exposed a lot of things about just
and
like the media.
It did a great job of showing the effects of the media on the person that they're talking about, and on making, you know, having made up the minds of all the other viewers.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I'll tell you right now, if this actually happened, within the first week, most of my family would 100% be convinced that he killed his wife.
Yeah, it happens all over the country. I think all over the world, but it's really a tragedy in and of itself. So glad to see that. And so I
think for that element of it alone, I think it's worth it to see this movie. I think that it really is a tense thrill ride. You don't ever really know where it's going to go, even when you think that you do, right up until the end, I think. I also think that it's just a lot of fun when you're watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think that Fincher really does a lot of fantastic things through his direction. I think that this could have been a much worse movie if there was someone with a lot less skill behind the camera, because honestly, just some of the things that he does in montages, and some of the shots that he constructs, and just like that kind of just eerie, pristine, kind of cold quality that he brings to these landscapes of suburban life. And like, I feel like you've seen that 100 times and you don't really feel it in the same way that you feel it in this movie, and I think that really amplifies everything. So I think that it's one of my favorite movies of the year too so far. I kind of thought that it had the chance to be my favorite movie of the year. Yeah, and I think that when it comes to the thematic questions behind it, it kind of falls flat a little bit, and I think that's where I kind of end up on it. Oh, sorry, just one more thing. I do agree that the conversations around this movie have been fascinating to follow, and it really does feel like the zero dark 30 of misogyny.
All right, viewers, thanks again for watching. Thanks, Alex, for coming on our show. We hope to have you back sometime. If you guys have any different opinions, we'd love to hear them. So comment on Facebook or on Twitter or YouTube, whatever, and keep checking for the podcast on iTunes, because I swear I'm going to get it up soon. So thanks again, and keep watching movies.